My father said it plain, the way he said everything that winter, standing at the cold end of the table with his hat already in his hand. If this one don't take, I'm sending the three of you to your Aunt Adelaide in Brennan City, and that's the end of it. He didn't look at us when he said it. He hadn't looked straight at any of us since the morning we buried our mother in the frozen ground above the creek, because we three had her eyes, and our father could not bear to see them. I was 13 that year. My sister Etta was 9 and had stopped speaking above a whisper. Our little brother Will was 5 and had taken to sleeping in the barn with the old dog because the house at night was too full of the wrong quiet. We were not bad children. We were only children with no one left to hold us, and a man who loved us so hard he'd gone somewhere none of us could follow. The Stony Hearth Ranch sat high above Tamarack Bend in the Bitter Creek country, where the winter came down off the peaks in November and didn't lift its boot off your throat until April. 3 housekeepers had come and gone since the burying. The first quit when Will bit her. The second left a note. The third didn't bother with a note. Each time, my father grew a little harder, a little quieter, and the threat of Brennan City crept a little closer, until it sat at our table like a fourth child nobody wanted. So when the stage came grinding up through the drifts that gray afternoon and a plain woman in a brown wool coat stepped down into the snow, I want you to understand that none of us hoped. Hope was a thing we'd run clean out of. The whole town had already taken her measure by the time her boots touched the road. I heard the talk later, the way a boy hears everything. No looks to speak of. No people anybody knew. Widowed and past her time, and answering a posting that 3 smarter women had already fled. Mrs. Prude at the mercantile said she gave it a fortnight. The blacksmith gave it less. They looked at Nell Coyne and saw nobody at all, and they were so certain of it that not one of them thought to look twice. She was not young, and she was not handsome, and she did not pretend to be either. She had a square, weathered face and steady gray eyes and hands that had clearly known work. She set her one small trunk down in the snow, looked up the long road toward our ranch, and did not flinch at the size of the mountains or the cold or the reputation of the place. She just picked the trunk back up and started walking, because no one had come down to fetch her, and that told her everything she needed to know about what waited at the top. My father met her at the gate with his arms crossed. He didn't take the trunk. "You'll have heard the others didn't stay," he said. "I heard," she said. "Wages on the 1st of the month. You cook and clean and mind the young ones. You don't touch the room at the end of the hall." That was our mother's room. He'd locked it and kept the key on a string around his neck. "And you call me Mr. Wren." "All right, Mr. Wren." She looked past him then, to where Etta and I stood in the doorway, and Will peered around my leg with his thumb in his mouth. Most grown folks looked at 3 motherless children with a kind of pity that made you want to crawl under the porch. Nell Coyne didn't. She looked at us the way you'd look at a fence that wanted mending, not broken, just waiting on someone with the patience to do it right. "There's 3 of you," she said to us like it was a fine thing and not a burden. "Good. A house this big needs 3. That first week she said almost nothing and did almost everything. The kitchen, which had gone to grease and ash under the others, came clean. Bread rose again on the warming shelf. Will's torn coat got mended with stitches so small you couldn't find them. She didn't scold and she didn't fuss and she didn't try to make us love her, which I came to understand much later was exactly why we began to. My father kept to the range from dark to dark, hazing cattle down out of the high pastures before the deep snow trapped them. And when he came in he ate what she set in front of him and grunted and went to bed. He'd built a wall around himself a foot thick, and Nell Coyne walked past it every day without once trying to climb over, and I think that confused him more than anything we 3 could have done. The trouble when it came over the barn. It was maybe the 9th or 10th night. I woke to find Will's pallet empty, which was no surprise, but the wind that night had teeth in it, the kind of cold that kills a small thing before morning. I got up to go drag him in like I always did. But when I came to the top of the stairs, I saw a lamp already burning down low, and I crept to the landing and looked. Nell had a shawl over her nightdress and her hair down her back, and she was kneeling on the cold floor of the front room, and she'd found Will's hiding place, the cupboard under the stairs, where he dragged a horse blanket and the dog. She wasn't pulling him out. She was just sitting there in front of the open cupboard with the lamp, talking to him so quiet I couldn't catch the words. I crept closer. "And I expect you sleep out here," she was saying, "because in there it's too quiet now and the quiet's got your mama's shape to it. That about right?" The dog thumped its tail. Will didn't answer, but I saw his small face turn toward her in the lamplight. "I know about that quiet," Nell said. "I had a little boy once, and a husband. The fever took them both inside of a week 6 winters back, and after my house got that same quiet and I couldn't sleep in it neither, so I know. I'm not going to make you go back in there tonight, but I'll tell you what I'll do if you'll let me." She reached behind her and dragged over a second blanket and her own pillow. "I'll just sit right here so the quiet's got something else to look at. You sleep. I'll mind it." And she did. She sat on that cold floor by the cupboard the whole night through, and in the morning Will was asleep against her shoulder, and the dog was asleep against Will, and the lamp had burned out hours since. I never told a soul I'd seen it. Some things a boy keeps. That she'd lost her own child and her own husband, and had never once said so to earn our pity, and had walked up that mountain anyway to mother somebody else's young ones. I didn't have the words for what that was when I was 13. I have them now. The word is grace, and it doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come often, and we had it under our roof and didn't know our luck. Etta was harder ground. My sister had appointed herself the keeper of our mother, her things, her memory, the careful 9-year-old's shrine of it. She'd salvaged a hairbrush and a blue ribbon and a chipped china bird from before Pa locked the room, and she kept them wrapped in a cloth in the bottom of her clothes chest. And she watched Nell coin the way a banty hen watches a hawk, waiting for her to try and take our mother's place so she could hate her clean and simple. Nell never tried. That was the thing. One afternoon Etta left the cloth bundle out on the bed by accident, and I saw Nell find it while she was tidying. I held my breath, sure she'd say something, move it, lay claim. She unwrapped it, looked at the brush and the ribbon and the little china bird a long moment. Then she wrapped it back up, exactly as it had been, every fold the same, and set it gentle in the bottom of Etta's chest where it belonged. And she never said one word about it, not that day or ever. But the next morning at the table she said, casual as weather, "Etta, your hair's got the same wave to it your mother's must have had. I can tell by how it won't lie down." She'd never met our mother. She was only guessing and guessing kind. "If you'd ever want it brushed out proper, I'd be glad, but only if you want." Etta didn't answer, but that night I heard the two of them in the lamplight, and the slow, patient sound of a brush going through tangled hair and my sister talking in something louder than a whisper for the first time since the burying, about our mother, about how she sang when she churned. Nell just listened and brushed and said now and then, "She sounds like she was something, and tell me that one again." She gathered up the pieces of our mother that Etta had been guarding all alone, and she held them, careful, and gave them back lighter than they'd been. She never once tried to be our mother. She only made it safe to have had one. My father saw none of this. Or he saw it and couldn't let himself look. The harder Nell wove us back together, the colder he got, until one night it broke open between them, and I heard that too from the stairs, where I did most of my growing up that winter. He'd come in late and found the door at the end of the hall standing open. Just open. Well, had got the key, slipped it off the string while Pa slept, the way only a 5-year-old can, and he and Etta had gone in to sit among our mother's things, and they'd left the door open and Nell had let them. That was her crime. She'd let them. "I told you that room stays shut." My father's voice was a low and terrible thing. "You did," Nell said, even as ever. "Then you had no business." "Wren?" She didn't raise her voice, but it stopped him cold. "Those children needed an hour with their mother, so I let them have it and I sat with them, and I'll do it again. You can lock a door. You can't lock the grief out, it only finds the children instead because they've got nowhere to put it down. You've got somewhere. You've got the whole high country to ride it out on, and you've been doing it dark to dark since the day you buried her. They've got a cupboard under the stairs and a wrapped-up hairbrush. It isn't enough, and you know it isn't. A silence then, so long I thought he'd gone. You don't know one thing about it, he said at last, but the iron had gone out of his voice. I know more than you'd guess, Nell said. I buried mine too. I'm not telling you to stop grieving her. Lord knows I'd never. I'm telling you your children are grieving alone in the next room while you grieve alone in the saddle, and the only one in this house doing it with company is me, and I'm a stranger you pay by the month. A pause. Lock the door if you have to, but I won't promise to keep them out of the only piece of their mother they've got left. You can dismiss me for it. That's yours to do. He didn't dismiss her. He went out to the porch and stood in the cold a long time, and I watched his shoulders from the window, and once, only once, I saw them shake. My father, who hadn't wept at the graveside, who hadn't wept at all that any of us had seen, stood out in the killing cold and put his fist against his mouth, and his shoulders shook. He thought no one saw. I saw. And the next morning the door at the end of the hall was unlocked, and stayed that way, and the key came off the string from around his neck and went onto a nail by the kitchen door where any of us could reach it. That was the first crack. There would be a worse one before the thaw. The blizzard came in February, the way the bad ones do, with a soft gray morning that lies to you. By noon you couldn't see the barn from the porch. My father was up in the high pasture with the last of the strays in 2 hands, and Etta had gone out after the chickens before it hit, and when the white came down she didn't come back. I will tell you what cold like that is, for those who have never met it. It is a living thing, and it means you harm. Nell had us both, me and Will, and the moment she understood Etta was out in it, I watched her become someone I hadn't seen. She put Will in the cupboard he loved with the dog and a quilt and told him plain, "You don't move from there till I'm back, no matter what you hear." She took the lantern and the long coil of barn rope, tied one end to the porch post and the other around her own waist, looked at me and said, "You feed that rope out and you do not let go of this post, you understand me, Caleb. Whatever happens, you're the anchor. The whole thing depends on the anchor holding." And then she walked out into the white and was gone in 3 steps. I held that post. I held it till my hands went past hurting into numb, and the rope paid out and out into the roaring nothing, and I prayed the only way a boy knows how, which is just saying please over and over with no idea who's listening. She found Etta against the chicken coop wall, too cold to cry, and she got her own coat around her and followed the rope back hand over hand, and when she came up out of the white onto the porch with my sister against her chest, she was so frozen she couldn't speak, and her hands had to be pried off the rope 1 finger at a time. But she'd held the other end, and I'd held mine, and between the 2 of us we'd held Etta in the world. My father got down off the mountain near dark, half frozen himself, and the first thing he saw coming into the warm kitchen was Nell Coyne wrapped in a blanket by the stove with all 3 of his children piled against her. Etta dosed with hot broth and asleep, Will with his thumb in his mouth and his fist knotted in Nell's sleeve. Me leaned on her other side, because the holding had taken something out of me too. He stood in the doorway with the snow melting off him, and he looked at that for a long, long moment. And I saw it happen. I was old enough to see it and young enough to not look away. I watched my father look at this plain, weathered, ordinary woman who had walked into a blizzard for a child not her own and come back carrying her, and I watched something in his stone face come apart, very quietly, like ice giving in the spring. He wasn't looking at a housekeeper he paid by the month. He was looking at the only warm thing in his frozen world, and he was terrified of it, because the last warm thing he'd had was sleeping under the frozen ground above the creek. And he knew now, by the way his chest had clenched when he'd come over the rise and seen the lamp lit, that he had gone and let himself care again. And caring, in his experience, was just grief that hadn't arrived yet. "You could have died out there," he said. "It came out rough." "So could she," Nell said, nodding down at Etta. "She didn't, that's the part that counts. And then, because she was honest before she was anything, I'd do it again. You should know that about me, Mr. Wren, if I'm to keep working in your house. Those are good children. I'd go out and worse for them." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He hung up his coat and he went and sat down at the table with us, for the first time since the burying, and Nell got up without a word and fixed him a plate, and he ate it there among his children, and nobody said anything about how his hand shook holding the spoon. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, a man eating supper with his family. We hadn't had it in a year. I have eaten in fine places since, as a grown man. I have never had a meal like that one. After that, the spring should have come easy. It didn't because of the letter. It came in March when the passes opened, from Aunt Adelaide in Brennan City, our mother's sister, a hard, prosperous woman who had decided, in the way that prosperous people do, that she knew best. She had heard, she wrote, that her dead sister's children were being raised wild by a grief-struck man and some hired woman of no family, and she was coming personally to collect us and see us properly placed. The 2 boys to a school, the girl to herself. She did not write split up. She didn't have to. We could read it plain, the 3 of us, sitting on the stairs while Nell read it aloud to our father in the kitchen. And here is the thing I have turned over my whole long life. My father, a month before, might have let it happen, might have told himself it was best, that a hard mountain man had no business raising a little girl, that the boys needed schooling he couldn't give, that letting us go was a kind of love. The wall a foot thick would have agreed with every word of it. But the wall had a crack in it now, and through the crack, for the first time, he was beginning to see what he had, not what he'd lost. He didn't say he'd fight it. He didn't say he wouldn't. He folded the letter and put it on the mantel and went out to the range, and the threat of Brennan City sat back down at our table, fatter and meaner than before. Adelaide Voss arrived in a hired coach with a trunk bigger than Nell's whole life. She swept into our front room in city black and looked at the 3 of us lined up, scrubbed and silent, and her eyes went wet in a practiced way, and she said how like our dear mother we were, and how she'd take us somewhere we'd be cared for proper. Then she looked at Nell Coyne standing quiet by the kitchen door in her brown wool, and she did the thing the whole town had done back in November. She took her measure in one glance and dismissed her. "You may go," she told Nell kindly, the way you'd speak to furniture. "Your services won't be needed past the month. I'll be taking the children Friday." And that was when my little brother Will, 5 years old, walked across the front room, past Aunt Adelaide and her city black and her trunk and her wet practiced eyes, and put both his arms around Nell Coyne's leg, and looked up at our father, who stood frozen by the cold hearth with his hat in his hand, exactly the way he'd stood the day all this began. "Please don't send her away, Pa," Will said. The whole room stopped. "Please?" Will's chin was shaking, but he held on. "I don't want to go to the city. I don't want to go where Etta can't. I want to stay here with Nell. She knows about the quiet. She came out in the snow. Please, Pa, please don't send her away." And then Etta crossed the room too and took Nell's hand, my sister who'd guarded our mother like a hawk, and she said in a voice loud and clear and not a whisper at all, "Me neither. I want to stay with Nell." And she looked our aunt dead in the eye and said, "She didn't take anything. She gave it back." I was 13 and I thought myself too old for it, and I crossed that room faster than either of them. We stood, the 3 of us, around Nell Coyne like she was a fence post in a flood, the only thing holding, and we looked at our father and we waited. I watched him look at us, and for the first time in a year and more, he did not look away from our mother's eyes. He let himself see them, 3 pairs of them, looking back at him, full not of the dead but of the living, of the woman who taught us to be loud again, to sleep again, to walk back out of the white again. He looked at his children choosing, with everything they had, the woman the whole world had called nobody. And I think in that moment my father finally understood what the rest of us had figured out weeks before, that the home he thought he'd buried up above the creek had quietly been rebuilt around him, board by board, while he was off riding the high country trying to outrun his grief. And the carpenter of it was standing in the kitchen doorway in a brown wool coat, holding his youngest son's hand, asking nothing for herself. He set his hat down on the mantel. He walked across the room, past his fine, prosperous sister-in-law, who had gone the color of a winter sky, and he stopped in front of Nell Coyne, and for a moment the hardest man in the Bitter Creek country couldn't find his voice. "I had it backward," he said low just to her, though we all heard. "I've been paying you to keep my house. The truth of it is you've been keeping all of us, and I never once thanked you nor looked at you square nor told you what you'd become to this family." He swallowed. "I'm a grief-soured man and I'll never be an easy one, but I'm asking you to stay, not by the month, not as the hired woman." He stopped. "Stay as my wife, Nell, as theirs. Of your own free choosing, and not 1 minute longer than you want to. You walked up this mountain a stranger nobody wanted. I'd have you walk it the rest of your days as the most wanted soul on it." Now I will tell you what Nell Coyne did, because it is the truest thing in this whole story. She did not fall into his arms. She did not weep, though her steady gray eyes shone. She looked at our father a long, level moment, the way she'd looked up the road that first cold day, measuring honestly what waited at the top. And then she looked down at the three of us pressed against her, and last of all at Will's small, hopeful face turned up at her, and she said, "I came up here to work, Mr. Wren. I didn't come up looking for a husband. And I'm too old and too plain to be anybody's foolish dream, and we both know it." A pause. "But I've come to love these three like they were my own, and I think you know that's not a thing I say light, having lost my own. So I'll not stay for wages, and I'll not stay for pity, and I'll not stay because a hard man finally noticed me in his hour of need." Her chin lifted. "I'll stay because I choose to. Because this is the home I'd build if I built one, and these are the children I'd raise if they were given me. And you, Amos Wren," it was the first time she'd ever used his given name, "you are a better man than you let yourself believe, and I'd be proud to be the one to wear you down to it. Yes, I'll stay, freely, as an equal in this house and never as anything less." "As an equal," my father said, like a man taking a vow. "I swear it." And Aunt Adelaide Voss gathered up her city black and her enormous trunk and her wet practiced eyes, and she left on Friday after all alone, and the whole town of Tamarack Bend, which had given Nell Coyne a fortnight, had to find something else to be wrong about. They were married that June, when the high meadows came up green and the whole creek ran loud with snowmelt, in front of a preacher and us three and not many others, and Nell wore the brown wool coat because she said it had carried her up the mountain and ought to be there at the top. My father laughed at that, laughed, out loud, a sound I'd half forgotten he owned, and the sound of it carried out over the green country, and I have never in my life heard a finer one. I am an old man now, older than my father ever got to be. I have my own grandchildren and a ranch of my own down in the lower valley, and on my mantel sits a chipped china bird that my sister Etta left me when she passed, the one our first mother owned and our second mother handed back. I keep it where I can see it. 2 mothers. Some men don't get the one. I had the both, and the second walked up a frozen mountain to get to me, in a brown wool coat, when the whole world had decided she was nobody and didn't bother to look twice. She raised us. She buried my father at a great age with her hand on the coffin and dry eyes and no shame in the tears that came after in private, the way she did everything. She lived long, and she was loud in our house till the end, and not one of us ever once called her anything but Mama, because that is what she was, because a little boy with his thumb in his mouth had figured it out before any of the grown folks could, that family isn't the thing you're born holding. It's the thing somebody chooses, and keeps choosing in the cold when the holding gets hard. "Please don't send her away," my brother said. He didn't, and of all the wise and foolish things my father ever did in his hard and tender life, that the day he listened to a 5-year-old and looked at his children's eyes instead of away from them, and let the plain woman stay, was the wisest. It made us a family again. It is the whole reason there was anybody left in the end to remember her, and to tell you now across all these years that she came and she stayed, and we were saved.